Hey there, welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. Okay, quick question, have you ever had that one neighbor who swears up and down that raccoons are government spies? No. Just me? Well, last week I ran into my Uncle Ray at the gas station. H.E.S. the guy who lives in a camper and collects CB radios like they're Pokemon. He looks me dead in the eye and says, "You ever hear about the owl that screams like a woman and steals sausages from my grill?" Naturally, I said, "Go on." Anyway, that launched a full 30-minute story about a creature with wings, glowing eyes and what he claims were fingers, not talons, snatching bratwursts from his backyard in northern Michigan. Now look, Uncle Ray's also the guy who thinks squirrels are tracking him, but he never lies about bratwursts. And that got me thinking, how many weird things happen out there that just get laughed off? So today's story? It's one of those. Not about bratwursts, but about a kid, a swinging something in the woods that might just prove maybe Uncle Ray isn't so crazy after all. Before we jump in, hit that like button, ding that notification bell, and if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Alright, let's get weird. The ones who watched from the pines. Some friends come and go. Others never leave, no matter how deep the woods. She was just a child the night she saw the eyes, burning orange low to the ground waiting. 10 steps from the outhouse. 10 yards from the hunting cabin. The kind of night where the silence isn't peaceful, it's listening. Evie Carter was only 9 when something came out of the trees. Not to hurt her, but to save her. A shadow that moved too fast, too strong to knowing to be a bear. And after that, she never saw her forest friends again, not with her eyes, anyway. But she felt them. Always watching. Always near. People call them Bigfoot. The forest folk. Some say they're protectors. Others monsters. But EVS story? It isn't a warning. It's a memory. A bond. One that reached across species, silence and fear. And like all the best stories whispered late at night, it begins with a child, a swinging the first pebble tossed from across the road. Now let her tell you the rest. The first time Evelyn MacArthur felt the forest speak to her, she was swinging alone on a crooked pine branch fashioned into a swing by her father's calloused hands. The rope creaked rhythmically, a dry, mournful sound that matched the groan of the trees swaying in the early autumn wind. The day smelled of apples turning soft, of corewood and damp leaves. She was just 9 years old then, with tangled copper hair and legs too skinny for the boots she wore. And that was the afternoon she saw the first stone roll across the dirt road, small, smooth, and deliberate. She paused mid, swing her cassette player wobbling the last lines of a Madonna song. The tape had started to stretch. The batteries were low. She stared at the road. Another pebble rolled out of the woods. Not a bounce. Not a toss. Just a soft, perfect roll like someone or something wanted her to notice. Evie, as she was known back then, was the kind of kid who frightened easily. She had heard Addie's steel spine and her mother's stubborn streak. She liked being alone in the woods more than she liked being around her mother's second family back in Minneapolis. But still, she knew what her father had told her every weekend without fail. Don't cross that road, Evie. Not ever. She stayed on her side. But the swing slowed to a stop, and her eyes searched the dense trees beyond the road. Thick Wisconsin pine and oak that swallowed daylight after 3 p.m. And then she saw it, just at the edge of the brush, low to the ground, peeking from behind a rotted log. 2 eyes, wide and curious, locked with hers. It was a deer. It was a raccoon. And it sure as hell was a squirrel. It looked like a monkey. That's what her 9-year old brain decided. Light cinnamon hair, skin that was mottled and gray underneath. But it moved like no monkey she had seen in any zoo. It crept forward on all fours, then rose slowly, carefully, until it stood up straight. She didn't scream. She didn't run. In fact, she smiled, raised her hand in a little wave, and the creature, whatever it was, tilted its head like a dog listening to a new word. The two of them stood there, frozen in mutual fascination, until Evie tossed one of her pebbles back toward the road. It skittered and bounced. The creature stepped back, watched, and then a minute later rolled another pebble toward her. It was a game, and it would be their game for the next 2 years. Her father, Jack Carter, a gruff man who looked like Tom Selleck with a compound bow, was out hunting every dawn. He'd leave her at the shack, nothing more than a glorified shed with a wood stove and a cooler full of spaghetti and apples, and vanish into the trees for hours. He trusted Evie to keep the fire going, to make her own cereal, to handle the 22 under the bed if she had to. Vietnam had made him paranoid, but it also made him a teacher. Evie knew how to track, how to fish with a spear, how to climb without snapping a branch. But she didn't know how to tell him what she was seeing, because what she was seeing wasn't in any of the manuals HED made her read. At first, she thought maybe he was testing her. Maybe it was one of his hunting buddies in a costume. But no, this was the trick. There were too many moments, tiny telling things that no human could have faked. Like the way it laughed. Not out loud, not like a person. But its chest shook, and its eyes lit up when she did something silly, like when she fell off the swing and pretended to be dead. It slapped the ground with its hands too long to pale underneath the fur. It looked back often, toward the tree line, and that's when she realized it wasn't alone. There was another figure, taller, thicker, still. It didn't move, but Evie felt it watching, eyes so heavy it made the hairs on her arms stand up. She didn't know the word then, but now Evelyn would call it maternal, protective. A mother. Its gaze was different, not playful, not amused, just watchful, alert. And here's the hook. She should have been scared. Every instinct in a child should have screamed to run back inside, lock the door, call her father. But she didn't, because whatever they were, they didn't feel like strangers. They felt like family. It wasn't just play anymore. She began bringing offerings. Grapes, venison jerky, her favorite green apple slices. She had placed them at the edge of the road. She'd wait, sometimes an hour, just to see them vanish. Never while she was looking. Always just after she blinked or turned or scratched her nose. One morning, a white feather lay in that same spot. With it, a little bouquet of wildflowers. Just weeds, really, but bunched together like a child's first attempt at a gift. She brought it inside. Dried the flowers. Still has them. What child would make up such a thing? She told her father, of course. Said she saw a monkey in the woods. He muttered something about escaped zoo animals and went back to cleaning his arrows. He wasn't listening. He didn't want to. Maybe he'd seen too much already in them. Maybe the woods had taken enough from him. He wasn't going to let them take his daughter, too. But the woods were patient, and they were kind, at least to her. Evie never broke the rule. Not once. Neither did the creature. Their unspoken truce, their quiet language of stones and glances and silence, that was sacred. Whatever bond they shared, it had boundaries. Until the night that bond was tested. And broken. But that comes later. For now, picture this, a little girl, dancing barefoot in pine needles, swinging above a dirt road, singing to a forest that listens. And something ancient singing back. The road wasn't really a road. More like a suggestion, a pale stripe of packed dirt carved between endless rows of pine, stretching from the county road into nowhere. It was barely wide enough for my father's pickup to slip through without brushing the tree branches on either side. But to me, back then it felt like the edge of the known world. On one side, the hunting shack. Ours. Home, if you wanted to call it that. On the other, the forest. I never crossed it. My father's rule was gospel. Evie, he'd say, slinging his bow over his shoulder in the grey pre, dawn light, you can swing all you like, just don't cross the damn road. You hear me? And did nod, biting my lip, knowing better than to argue. He was the man who wasted words. Jack Carter, Vietnam vet, tall as a silo and twice as tough. His hands looked like they'd been carved from river rock, and he could split an apple on a fence post with an arrow from 60 feet. He was the kind of man other men whispered about. And yet in those woods he was just another hunter, something smaller than the silence. Every weekend, like clockwork, HED picked me up from Mom's place in the city. My mother had remarried a man who smelled like carpet glue and called me kid like he forgot I had a name. They had 2 toddlers together, crying sticky-fingered things that I tried not to hate. So when Dad's truck pulled up, all mud-caked and muffler rattling, I ran. That shack in Wisconsin was everything he loved: isolation, control, and the woods. And it became everything I loved too, mostly because it meant I had him to myself. At least until the sun came up. Then he was gone. Into the forest, bow in hand, boots silent on moss and loam. HED leave me with a cooler full of cold spaghetti, jerky, fruit, and cereal. He taught me how to light the stove, how to work the lock, how to chamber around if something came scratching at the door. I was 9, and I wasn't afraid. Not yet. The cabin itself wasn't much. 4 walls, a roof patched with shingles and tar paper, a chimney that quaffed smoke in the mornings, and a single window with a view of the dirt road. No electricity. No running water. The outhouse was 10 yards out, tucked behind a thicket of sumac. The swing was closer, just across from the porch, hanging from a crooked pine that leaned like it had secrets to keep. It was my stage, my perch, my world. That swing was where I first saw them, where I first felt them. You'd think with all the hours I spent alone I'd get bored. I did, at first, but then I started noticing things, like the rhythm of the trees, the way the shadows moved differently in the afternoon, like the forest was breathing in its sleep. Sometimes it hummed to myself, and the breeze would rise with me, lift the hair off my neck like fingers brushing past. I told myself it was just the wind, until it wasn't. There were days when the silence was so complete, I could hear my heart tapping in my chest. No birdsong, no insects. Just me, the swing, and something else. Something I couldn't name. It'd get that prickling down my spine, that deep animal knowing that something was watching me. Not in a menacing way. Not yet. Just aware. The swing creaked. The cassette tape hissed. My voice echoed when I sang, bouncing off the trees like the woods themselves were listening. One day, I stopped mid-chorus because I felt it, eyes right across the road. I looked. Nothing. But a second later, a small rock skittered out from the underbrush. I froze. Then another came. Then 2 more. Like pebbles being played with by a child who didn't know they were being watched. I should have gone inside. I should have called my father. But instead, I picked one up and tossed it back. That's when it started. Every morning after that, I checked the road. Most days, there was nothing. But sometimes, a stone would appear. Always on my side. Always road. And one day, a green apple I left was gone. Vanished. No bite marks. No scraps. Just a missing piece, like a puzzle taken out without a sound. But here's the part that changed everything. One morning, as I was brushing my hair with my fingers, the swing twisting gently in the breeze, I saw movement. Not a rock this time. Not a trick of light. Something low and fast darted between 2 trees. I held my breath. The forest exhaled. Then he stepped out. Just at the edge, half shadowed by pine limbs. The same cinnamon-colored creature I'd glimpsed before, only now he was closer. Closer than he should have been. He walked on all 4s at first, then stood awkward like a toddler learning balance. He was tall. Maybe my height. But thick. Muscles under fur like a bear crossed with a boy. We stared at each other. I didn't move. Neither did he. Then, in one slow, careful motion, he dropped a pebble, right at the edge of the road, and backed away. That was our line. He never crossed it. I never did either. But we'd meet at the middle, in silence every day. It'd swing HED sit. Sometimes HED mimicked me, tilting his head when I sang, copying my movements. Other times, he just watched. I got the sense he was studying me the way I was studying him, trying to understand. But the real moment, the one I've never forgotten, came weeks later. I left out a slice of jerky and some grapes. I was hoping HED come closer, maybe touch the swing. I turned away for just a second, and when I looked back, she was there. The mother. She stood behind him, not quite touching, but close enough to claim. She was tall, so tall I thought she'd scrape the sky if she stood straight. But she didn't. She crouched, arms long, legs knotted like tree roots, her face hidden beneath thick hair, but her eyes found mine, and I couldn't breathe. There was no sound, no growl, no warning. Just a look, one that said everything and nothing at once. I blinked, and she was gone. But from that day on, I knew. This was just some zoo escape. This was the trick of the forest. There were others out there, a family, watching, waiting, not to hurt, not yet, but to protect. The cabin felt smaller after that. The nights darker, and though I told my father, tried to explain in the only words a child could muster, he laughed it off. Probably a raccoon, he said, or your imagination, but I knew. I knew. Because after that day, every time I stepped onto that swing, I wasn't alone. And one evening, just before dusk, I found something new on our side of the road. A feather. Long, white, impossibly clean. And next to it, a little bundle of clover and flowers, tied together with grass like a child's forgotten bouquet. It was a gift. It was an answer. And I never asked what the question was. There was a shift in the air the day he stepped closer. Not the kind you notice with your skin, but something deeper, like the wind held its breath in the trees, leaned in just a little more than usual. I was already sitting on the swing, the rope squeaking with that familiar rhythm, singing under my breath with a piece of green apple in my hand, when I saw the top of his head rise above the underbrush. He was there, not hiding, not playing, just standing. His fur caught the late morning light, soft, shaggy, a warm cinnamon brown with strands that glowed like autumn leaves when the sun hit them. He was closer than usual, maybe 20 feet from the road. That was the closest HED ever dared. And I dared to stay still, barely breathing, apple slice in hand, heart in my throat. He watched me. I watched him. And that day, I offered the apple not at the edge, but just a few feet into the road. He didn't move, just watched. But when I backed away and sat back on the swing, humming again, he stepped forward. One foot, then the other, slow and measured, like he was testing the earth with each step. And when he reached the apple, he knelt. Not like a human, not like an animal, like something in between. He sniffed it, picked it up gently, and backed away, eyes never leaving mine. From then on, it was different. Our game with pebbles became more. He'd bring grapes in a napkin, slices of jerky wrapped in wax paper, or once a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. It placed them on a smooth stone just shy of the center line and weight. And every single time, they were gone. Sometimes in minutes, sometimes an hour later, but always gone. And in their place feathers, stones that looked polished, a stick shaped like a Y that somehow looked intentional. They were gifts in the way people give gifts. They were messages, and I think I was starting to understand them. The boy I called him that, though I didn't have a name, began to mimic me. When it swing, HED sway side to side. When I clapped a rhythm, HED thump his chest or tap the ground. There was intelligence in his eyes. Not like an ape, not like a child, but something else, something more ancient, like the forest had carved him from its roots and let him learn by watching. He was curious, bright. HED cocked his head when I sang, and once I swear I heard a low humming sound come from him. It was the song. more like a vibration, like the woods were singing back through him. But he wasn't alone. His mother, or what I was certain was his mother, was always there, just behind him. Huge, still terrifying and beautiful in the way a mountain or a thunderstorm is beautiful. Her fur was darker, more matted. Her face was broad, with deep-set eyes that glinted in the dim light like wet river stones. She never came as close as he did, but she watched every move. When he grew bold, took a step too far, her posture changed. She crouched low, lips tight, muscles pulled like bowstrings. And when that happened, he always retreated. One day I tried something different. I took one of my favorite apples, bright red, the kind my dad picked from a roadside stand, and I rolled it toward the woods past the road. It was a test. Ada. The boy didn't move. His mother stood instantly, her massive hand on his shoulder. There was a sound then, not loud, not human, like a deep, wet bark buried in the back of her throat. And just like that, he sat down, eyes wide, silent. It made a mistake. It was just a game. It was friendship. It was ceremony, ritual, and it broken the rule. I apologized. Out loud, hands folded, bowing slightly the way I'd seen in movies. I didn't know what else to do. But she watched me for a long time and finally sat back down. The next morning, the apple was gone. In its place, a perfect circle of acorns. I called and tell my father. I tried. But he was tired. Always tired. More interested in his boughs, in his hunting magazines, and beer and silence. When I told him about the creatures, he laughed. Bears, he said. Maybe raccoons. When I insisted, he said, you think too much, Evie. That's your mother and you. But even he noticed one morning when we came back from the lake and found muddy prints, small ones leading up to the swing. Not bear tracks. Not human. Something in between. He cursed under his breath, tightened his grip on his rifle, and didn't speak the rest of the night. The next day, he moved the swing. Farther back. Away from the road. Away from the woods. And that evening nothing came. No pebbles. No humming. Just the sound of the swing creaking, alone in the wind. 3 days passed. Then one night, late long after Dad went to bed, I heard it. A knock. 3 soft taps against the side of the shack. I froze. Listened. Nothing. Then again. 3. Measured. Intentional. I got up. Peered through the sliver of curtain. Nothing but trees and night. I should have been scared. But I wasn't. I whispered, him still here. And that's when I saw it, his small hand reaching just barely into view, placing a rock on the porch. One it painted days before, bright yellow, with a smiling face. That's how I knew. He remembered me. He missed me. And somehow, impossibly, he forgave me. But the forest doesn't give you forever. Because the next time I saw them would be the last. It began the way most big things do, in a moment so small, so quiet you don't realize it's changing everything. That morning, I laid an napkin at the edge of the dirt road, neat and square, with 3 grapes, a slice of venison jerky, and one of my last butterscotch candies folded inside. I folded it slowly, like wrapping a gift. And that's what it was, a gift, though I didn't yet understand what I was asking for in return. I backed away without looking. It learned it not to stare. You didn't stare at the forest. It made the wrong things come closer. I took to watching from the porch, leaning against the doorway just enough to see the edge of the road, but not enough to be seen. And there it was, the boy again. Same cautious steps, same way his body moved in slight, controlled shifts, like he was always listening to something I couldn't hear. His eyes flicked toward the trees behind him, and she emerged. The mother didn't walk like he did. She moved with power, slow and certain, like she didn't need to hide. That day, for the first time, she stepped onto the road. Not far. Just 2 strides. She was hunched, knuckles brushing gravel, and the weight of her made the rocks crunch in a way you'll never forget. Low, heavy final. She knelt beside the napkin and unfolded it, the way someone might with a gift they didn't expect to receive. And then she looked up at me, not at the house, not in the general direction. Right at me. My knees buckled. Because this was curiosity. It wasn't fear. It was thanks. She gathered the bundle with one hand, stood upright with fluid grace, and walked backward into the woods, her massive frame swallowed by branches in shadow. The boy didn't follow right away. He waited. Just a moment. Then turned, looked at me once more, and vanished. The next morning I found a bundle on the porch. It wasn't food. It wasn't anything it left. It was beautiful. Tied with braided grass, there was a sprig of purple wildflowers, a smooth blue stone shaped like a heart, and a long white feather that shimmered when the light hit it. I picked it up like it might break, hands trembling. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't need to. This was mine, between me and the woods. From then on, our exchanges grew deeper, like a conversation without words. It leaves something. They do leave something. Sometimes simple, like a carved stick. Once, a ring made of bark that slid perfectly onto my pinky. And once, this is the part I still don't talk about often, I left out an old photo of me and my mom. Torn at the edges, creased from years of being folded in my pocket. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted them to know I'd lost things too. Maybe I wanted to see if they understood sadness. 3 days later, I found a smooth slab of wood at the edge of the swing. On it was a burned image, dark and singed, of 2 figures. One tall, one small, holding hands. Crude, yes, but clear. That's when I realized they weren't just watching me. They knew me. They saw me. And somehow they understood. But it couldn't last. Nothing that sacred ever does. One day, I heard it. A branch snapped. Not in the woods on the road. I ran outside and saw the boy. HED crossed. He was on my side. For the first time, he was standing near the swing, touching the ropes, inspecting the knot like a child inspecting a toy HED been dreaming about for months. He looked up and saw me. We both froze. This was different. This was our dance. This was the line. He had stepped beyond it. And I didn't stop him. I took a step forward. Just one. But that was all it took. From the woods came a sound I had never heard before and haven't heard since. A scream, low and guttural but layered. Like it came from lungs far bigger than any bear. Like rage and fear and heartbreak all pouring out in one wretched, thunderous cry. The boy spun, dropped the swing, and bolted. I stood there, heart in my throat, and then I saw her. She was standing this time. She was charging. Not toward me, toward him. She scooped him up mid-stride, flung him onto her back like a mother bear grabbing her cub, and without slowing, disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, because I knew I'd broken something. They didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. I left out a gift. Nothing. I sang to the woods. Silence. I cried quietly into my pillow, and still nothing. But then on the 3rd morning a whisper returned. Not a sound. A feeling. I stepped outside and found the feather again. The same white shimmer. But this time, it was stabbed into the ground like a flag. A warning. Or maybe a goodbye. I wanted to run after them. To apologize. To beg them to understand. But I knew that wasn't how this worked. You didn't call them. You didn't command the woods. You waited. And maybe if you were lucky they returned. But something inside me knew they wouldn't. Not like before. because I had taken the gift of trust and asked too much of it. And it would be years before I saw those eyes again. Not in the clearing, not in the swing, but in the dark. And by then it would be far too late. It was the kind of night that felt thick with silence, the sort that pressed in around the walls like fog, soft but choking. My dad had come back late from hunting. He didn't say much. He never really did. He ate the spaghetti cold, drank one beer, checked his traps on the wall, and crawled into bed with the old rifle by his side like always. I stayed up a while longer just listening to the stove crackle, to the creaks of the shack settling, but also to the woods, because sometimes if I was quiet enough, I could hear them. That night I couldn't, and that in itself was loud. It hit me in the gut, sudden and urgent. I had to pee. And the outhouse, of course, was 10 yards from the cabin, just past the firewood stack, through a patch of weeds that always seemed taller at night. I didn't want to wake Dad. I didn't want to deal with the grumbling, the just hold it, or the heavy footsteps behind me. I was 9, and I figured I was tough enough. So I grabbed the flashlight, crept to the door, and stepped outside. The cold snapped at my ankles. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the slow drip of condensation falling from the eaves. I walked quickly, crunching gravel under my boots, focusing on the little cone of light the flashlight cast in front of me. I reached the outhouse, did what I had to. Nothing strange, nothing unusual. Until I stepped out. Something wasn't right. You know that moment when your brain hasn't caught up to your instincts yet, but your body already knows you're in danger? That. I felt it before I saw it. My heart hit the brakes and then slammed the gas. The light from my flashlight swept across the clearing and landed on a pair of eyes. Not reflective like a deer's, not yellow like a raccoon's. Orange. Deep orange. Set wide apart. Low to the ground but too big to still. And watching me. I froze. It didn't move. At first I thought it was a trick. My flashlight playing off a bottle or a pair of mushrooms. But no, there was intent behind those eyes. And worse, there was something like joy. Like whatever it was wanted me to see it. And then it smiled. Not with lips. With presence. With weight. I could feel it, that kind of grin that doesn't belong to anything kind. My legs wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't work. And the flashlight began to shake in my hand. I blinked. And in that split second, something came out of the trees. Not a sound before. No warning. Just a blur, massive and fast, crashing into the shape with the eyes like a freight train made of fur and rage. The flashlight flew from my hand. I stumbled backward, falling onto the cold dirt. I heard it then. The fight. But it wasn't long. A thud. A growl, guttural and wet. A snap like a branch breaking under too much weight. Then silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I lay there, staring up at the stars that had no business watching what just happened. My chest felt hollow. My arms shook. The cold didn't bother me anymore. And then, above me a shadow. It was the boy. He was smaller. This one was leaner than the mother, but taller than my dad, taller than any human I'd ever seen. I couldn't see its face in the dark, but its hand rose slowly, and with one finger it pointed to the cabin. A signal. Go. I did. I got up on shaky legs and ran, not looking back, not even thinking. Just ran inside, locked the door, and crawled into bed next to my dad, who never even stirred. I didn't tell him. Not then. Not for years. But I lay there listening, waiting, wondering if they were still out there. I never saw the boy again after that. Not at the swing. Not at the road. Not even at the edge of the clearing. He was just gone. and in his place, silence. Not angry, not empty, just final. But that night left something inside me that never quite left. Because I still don't know what that thing with the eyes was. And if my friend hadn't been there, if whatever protected me hadn't come when it did, what would have happened? No one ever talks about what else might be out there. Everyone is too busy chasing Bigfoot to ask what Bigfoot is running from. And that thought has haunted me ever since. Because what if they weren't just forest people? What if they were guardians? And what if something worse is still out there watching? For a while, I convinced myself it washed over. That they were just keeping their distance. That the woods needed time. I still left out grapes, still hummed softly on the swing even though the ropes had started to fray. The seat was splintered now. The pine tree it hung from had begun to lean a little more, just enough to throw off the rhythm. But I kept swinging, because I thought maybe the motion, that old familiar beck, and forth would call him back. But weeks passed, and nothing came. It was the silence that finally got to me, not just the absence of them. It was as if the whole forest had agreed to forget. No rocks rolled across the road. No feathers. No laughter. Not even the watching. Then one morning, I found something that was a gift. The swing had been cut. Plain through. Both ropes, neatly severed. The seat lay in the dirt, twisted sideways like it had fallen mid-swing. I remember dropping to my knees, hands buried in the pine needles, tears hot in my eyes. Not from fear. From grief. The kind of grief you only feel when you lose something too rare to name. My father said it must be rotted through. That the wind had brought it down. But there hadn't been any wind. Not for days. And I checked the cut myself. Sharp. Intentional. Like a knife or claws. I didn't swing after that. I didn't sing. I started waking up before sunrise, sitting near the woodpile with my knees drawn up and my flashlight off, just waiting for the first sound. But it never came. Not even a rustle. I still remember the last morning we spent at the cabin that fall. My father was packing up the gear, loading his crossbow, talking about a hunting trip down south. I stood at the edge of the road, arms crossed, staring into the forest that had once felt like a second home. I whispered goodbye into the trees. That's when I saw it. The blue stone. The same one they'd given me months earlier, the one shaped like a harp, polished smooth by hand or time or both. It sat on top of the old swing seat which something had leaned gently against the trunk of the pine. I didn't tell my father. I didn't take the stone. I just stared at it until he called me to the truck. That winter I didn't return to the shack. My father started bringing his girlfriend's son instead. Said he was older, easier to handle. I didn't argue. I stayed with my mom in the city. But sometimes he'd sit on the fire escape at night, bundled in a hoodie, and hung quietly into the frozen wind, hoping somehow it would carry. Years passed like seasons do when you're not watching. I stopped believing in things. I stopped looking. Until one spring afternoon in Brainerd, years later I went hiking with a friend through a park trail. The trees were thinner, younger. The air smelled of moss and damp stone. It wasn't the same as the woods I remembered, but something about the wind felt familiar. We stopped at a bend in the trail. My friend was tying her bootlace. I stepped off the path just a few feet, wandered toward a crooked tree with bark peeling like old paint. And there, pressed into the mud beside a root, was a footprint. Not a boot. Not a deer. Wide, flat, toes spread slightly, bare. And beside it, pressed gently into the earth, a perfect white feather. I didn't say anything, just stared, long enough for my friend to look up and ask if I was okay. I nodded. But inside me, something stirred. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. Because it spent years wondering if it imagined it, if it invented them out of loneliness or childhood grief. But there, in that patch of Minnesota earth was proof I never asked for. Proof I didn't need because I already knew. And for the first time in a long time, I felt them watching again. Not close. Not in the way you feel someone behind you. But like a memory made flesh. Something ancient. Kind. Patient. And I understood. They hadn't left me. They'd simply gone quiet. Because the forest has rules. And I had broken one. But forgiveness, it grows in silence. So now when I walk in the woods, and I rarely do, I hum softly. I stay to the paths, and I leave little gifts when no one is watching. Not because I want to see them again. Not really. But because they saw me. When no one else did. And that kind of grace you never repay. You just carry it with you. Like a stone in your pocket. A feather on your shoulder. Or the sound of a swing still creaking somewhere just across the road. It wasn't until I was grown, years later with the forest long behind me, that I began to realize the story it lived whilst mine alone. I had moved back to northern Minnesota briefly in my early 30s, trying to untangle a life that had knotted itself around the wrong people, the wrong choices. The city had frayed my nerves. Too many lights. Too much noise. So I found a place near Lutsen, a little cabin, not unlike my father's tucked between birch and pine. I didn't plan to stay long. But on the second night, as I sat on the back step with a cup of weak coffee and an old fleece wrapped around my shoulders, I heard it again. The creak. Not of a door. Not of a tree. A swing. The wind had been still. The trees were motionless. But that sound, that rhythmic lonely cry of rope against wood, echoed from somewhere just beyond the tree line. And it dragged me right back. The next day, I went into town and asked the librarian, an older woman with silver hair and hands that looked like she'd been born turning pages, if there were any local stories, old legends, maybe about creatures in the woods. She looked at me without blinking and said, "Nantai and AQ." She wrote it down carefully as if even spelling it was something sacred. "Old stories from Alaska mostly," she added, "but they travel. These things, they go where they want." I spent hours digging. Not in books, they didn't talk much about this, but in whispers. From fishermen who wouldn't go into certain parts of the forest after dusk. From hikers who'd seen silhouettes too big to be moose, too upright to be bear. From an old white elder who looked me dead in the eye and said, "We know they're not animals. We just don't speak of them." That hit something inside me, because I hadn't spoken either. Not really. I found old newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, with headlines like "Logger vanishes in Whiteface Woods" or "Boy missing from schoolyard. Search called off after dogs refused to enter tree line." No conclusions. No suspects. Just disappearance. And every time the same patterned sightings of figures in the distance, strange sounds in the night, footsteps too wide apart to be human. One account showed me 1952, just outside Bemidji. A woman claimed her child had been playing in the yard when he began tossing pebbles toward the trees. Minutes later he was gone. She said she heard humming. Low. Soft. When searchers came, they found a perfect string of feathers in the grass. They never found the boy. The official report called it an unfortunate wandering off. But she never left her house again. And here's the hook. What if it was always the same ones? What if the boy I knew, the cinnamon-haired child, was their child, passed down through generations of whispers and silence? What if the forest people aren't myth but lineage? What if they watch us not because they fear us, but because they remember? I found stories from the Pacific Northwest, tales of the Skookum, wild people who lived in caves, who spoke in clicks and knocks, who took only what they needed and vanished when the settlers came. I found carvings, hundreds of years old, of beings tall, broad with eyes to widen, hands that hung to their knees. Not monsters. Guardians. Keepers of balance. But what made my stomach turn wasn't the similarities. It was the pattern. Every culture, every forest, every time the same thing. They appear when we forget to listen. They vanish when we get too close. They protect. And when something worse comes, they fight. I remembered the night in the outhouse. The orange eyes. The grin. And I realized they weren't the only ones in the woods that night. And maybe they never had been. It wasn't until I sat still long enough to let silence speak that the questions started to bite deeper than the memories. All these years later, I still don't know what they were, not in any scientific sense. I can give them names borrowed from legends, draped in language from cultures that respected the woods more than we ever have. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Forest People, Nantai and Akio. But names don't make things real. Experience does. And what I experienced, it was just a creature. It was a choice. See, I used to think they found me. That they stumbled onto a lonely girl swinging in the woods and felt sorry enough to watch over her. But what if I was never random? What if I was chosen? What if, from the moment I threw that first pebble back, they decided to let me in? And here's the thing that keeps me up sometimes. Maybe I was supposed to be. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened. Not just the swing, the gifts, the protection, but the why. Why me? Why any of it? And more urgently, why did they disappear the way they did? People want answers. They want DNA, bones, photos. But I have something heavier than all that. I have the feeling of being watched, known, protected, and then abandoned. That's the kind of thing that doesn't fade. I've read every theory. The scientific ones, same as hallucination, psychological projection, a child's coping mechanism for abandonment. But that theory dies the moment you hold a feather that washed from any bird you've seen before. The spiritual ones say I crossed into another realm. That they're interdimension, part of something older and deeper than our understanding. But that sounds like the kind of thing people say when they're too afraid to say what they really think. Which is this. What if they're still here? Not just near, not just watching, but everywhere. What if they're not hiding, we just stopped seeing? And here's your hook. One night not long ago, I went hiking with my son. He was 10. Same age I was. Same wild curiosity. He picked up a stick and started tapping it against a tree trunk, rhythmically like he was speaking a language he didn't know. I asked him what he was doing. He looked at me with that honest, unaware smile and said, I think something's listening. My blood ran cold. He didn't know the stories. I never told him. But something in him remembered. So now I wonder, did I pass it on? Is there something in us, some thread in the blood, that calls to them? Or worse, did they mark me somehow and now they're watching him too? It'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid. Not of them. Not really. But of what else might be watching. The thing with the orange eyes. The grin. The weight behind the silence. Because if they were protecting me, then what were they protecting me from? And why did they stop? Maybe it's not about proof. Maybe it's about presence. Maybe they exist in the spaces between the trees, in the gaps in our understanding, in the pauses in our logic. I don't walk in the woods like I used to. Not because I'm scared. Because I'm seen. And that kind of visibility doesn't go away. I feel them when the wind shifts just right. I hear them in the night when the world forgets to be noisy. And I sense them near my boy when he's just on the edge of being alone. So I teach him to respect the woods. To listen. Not to chase. Because I know now. Some things step forward when you call them. But not all of them come in peace. And once they've looked at you, really seen you, something inside you never quite looks away again. There are nights when the wind shifts just enough to stir the curtains in my living room, even though the windows are closed. Nights when the dogs won't stop barking down by the tree line, and I catch myself staring out the kitchen window, waiting for something I don't know how to describe. Most nights, there's nothing. But sometimes I swear I hear footsteps that aren't mine on the back porch. A thump, then silence, then nothing but my own breath, held far too long in the dark. I'm older now. Not old, but older. I've lived in enough places and read enough books and held enough broken people to know most mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us we're not the center of anything. Just guests. Temporary. Fleeting. Witnesses if we're lucky. That's how I feel about them now, the forest people. Witnessed. And maybe in some strange way chosen. I used to wonder what they wanted, what made me so special. But I don't wonder anymore. Because I've learned that not everything needs a reason to find you. Sometimes you're just seen. And once you've been seen by something older than time, you don't get to unsee the world. I never did see the boy again. Not the way I remembered him. But one spring not long ago I went walking at dusk. The light was honey, colored soft and low, and I found myself at the edge of the woods. The same woods. And something pulled me forward. I didn't go far, just to the first bend in the trail, and there it was, half buried in pine needles, a circle of stones, perfectly round, too deliberate to be chance. No footprints, no wind, no reason. Just a reminder. That's when I realized some bonds don't break. They just fall quiet. And then there are the dreams. Not every night, but often enough that I don't call them coincidence anymore. And then, I'm a child again on that swing, singing to trees that hum back. And across the road, just at the edge of vision, the boy stands. Still young, still watching. Not older, not changed. But I have. In the dreams, I don't speak. I just swing. And sometimes, if I look away long enough, I hear the rope creak and feel the air move beside me like HES taking the empty swing next to mine. We never look at each other in the dreams. We don't have to. Because we both remember. That's the thing about being seen. It isn't always about being saved. Sometimes it's just about being known. And there's a kind of comfort in that, isn't there? Knowing that somewhere, out there just past the reach of the porch light, someone still knows your name, even if they've never spoken it. That someone still carries your memory through the trees in the silence, in the rhythm of leaves falling soft to the ground. They're still watching. I know they are. Not to harm, not even to guide. Just to remember. And every now and then when the wind rises low and the woods exhale, I feel it, their presence like a shadow on my skin. And I whisper into the dark, just in case they're close enough to hear. I remember you too. There are places in this world that live quietly between the lines of maps, forgotten by time, untouched by progress, yet forever etched into the soil of memory. Not every story that begins in the woods ends with understanding. Some truths don't ask to be explained. They ask to be felt. Because the forest doesn't speak in words. It speaks in moments, in glances, in silence so full it hums. The stories that grow there, rooted in moss, carried in the breath between branches, they don't need to be solved to be real. They just need to be honored. Maybe what we call mystery is just a truth we aren't ready for. Maybe what we name creature is something older, something softer, something more sacred than we're willing to admit. Perhaps it isn't about proving they exist, but understanding why we keep looking, why we listen for footsteps in the stillness, why we find ourselves staring just a moment longer into the dark. There is something about the unknown that stirs something ancient in us, a yearning not for answers, but for connection, for reverence, for the kind of quiet that reminds us we are small and lucky to be so. So, if one day you find yourself walking a little slower through the trees, if the wind carries a sound that doesn't quite belong, or you feel eyes watching, not with menace, but with memory, pause. Don't run. Don't chase. Just listen. Because some stories are still being told in the spaces where no words exist. And some things, once seen, are never truly gone. They linger like mist at dawn, like the creak of a swing no one touched, like the feeling you're not as alone as you think. And that's not something to fear. That's something to remember. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the inn, between the place where myth and memory meet. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment you've never quite been able to explain, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. There are more stories waiting in the quiet. And together, well, keep listening.